Hey, are you a business owner, entrepreneur, or professional? If so, we want you to apply to be a featured guest on our show. My name is Adam Torres, and I host the Mission Matters series of podcasts. I've recorded over 3,000 episodes, and we are just getting started. How do you know if you'd be a good guest to be on the show? Well, only one way to find out, and that's to apply, but I'm going to let you in on a little secret. We want guests that have a story to tell, guests with a brand, a product, or a service that can benefit my audience of listeners. If this sounds like you, go to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. I'd love to talk to you and get to know more about your story. Again, head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, now let's get into the show. Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today I have Giovanni Gallo on the line, and he's co-CEO over at ComplianceLine. Giovanni, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam, glad to be here.
All right, Giovanni, so I'm excited to get into today's topic. So we're going to talk about building internal cultures that balance priorities. But before we get into that, I'd like to go a little bit further into what you're doing over at ComplianceLine. Tell us a little bit more about the company, please.
Yeah, so ComplianceLine helps leaders in companies in a few different ways. We think of this as just like when you're healthy, you want to make sure that you're not sick, and then there are actions you can take to become healthier and stronger. We do that with companies, right? An organization is an organism with a bunch of people in it, and we help get out that toxic behavior. We help identify risk and identify things that are happening that are going to cause a problem for the people within that culture and the company as a whole. And then through those same methods of engagement, we help people really build strong cultures by building engagement with their employees, building a culture of trust, and helping align people around that mission. And, you know, the products and services that we do are, you know, we have a third-party hotline for people to call. We have online reporting. We have workplace investigations that we help people with. We do background screening and license monitoring. We do e-learning to really help a leader kind of get at a few different angles of really what it is that builds a culture. It's the knowledge of the people, it's the behaviors of the people, and it's ultimately those ties that bind everyone together that makes up a culture.
That's awesome. And so, Giovanni, at the end of this, I'm going to give you the opportunity to leave either a website or social or whatever individuals or organizations that are listening to this right now can follow up to learn more about ComplianceLine. But I do want to make sure that the right types of individuals and organizations follow up. What's typically a good fit to work with ComplianceLine, whether it's niche of company or size of organization or otherwise?
Yeah, so we basically work well with companies that have people in them.
I love it. They got told us you gotta have people. I mean, that's
yeah, you gotta have people. If it's just a bunch of machines, like we're probably not going to do a lot with that. But really, the person who gets concerned about this changes across a different size company. Mm-hmm. So at a small company with, you know, under 100 or under 500 employees, it may be the CEO or it may be someone in that executive role who says, hey, you know what, I'm on the hook for this. I got to really make sure that the bad things don't happen and I want my team taken care of. As you get larger, then it's usually a subset of HR, and as you get really even bigger than that, there's usually a subset of HR called compliance, and those are the people who are, you know, they're writing policies, but then they also have to make sure that everyone on the organization doesn't violate those policies, and then you kind of get into this bridge between compliance and HR where we want people taken care of. And we don't want this bad stuff to happen. And listen, like everyone knows, you've seen the news stories, you've seen the protests and stuff. This is not the 1990s where the lawyers can just make sure that the executives stay out of trouble. There's a thing happening in our society where employees are demanding more and more that they're treated respectfully at work, that they're not discriminated against, that they're not existing in a hostile and toxic work environment. And more, it's not only expected, but it's a strategic differentiation to have a strong workplace culture, and that's what we help people with. Again, kind of across different sizes, it's going to be kind of tasked by a different person, but, you know, there should be someone at your company who cares about taking care of the people and making sure there's a strong culture, and we're here to help with that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And, thinking about how we were, and I like how you even just said the 90s, and if we go further back, we know, some of the history even before that, obviously. But, I think in the past it was thought of as like a trade-off. Like it was like, all right, like, the cost maybe to invest into and to make sure that you have a good workforce culture, or some of those did some of those other things. It was like a trade-off. It's like it doesn't necessarily contribute, and I think to make or does it like to the financial bottom line, financial performance overall. And I think that's pretty much been dispelled by many companies at this point. But I will ask you, so how does strong culture really support financial performance?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there definitely is, as you said, Adam, there's this kind of change in the zeitgeist that has happened over time where people are waking up to the fact that, hey, you know what, this is, I'm not hiring a bunch of automatons. These are not robots that just do what they're programmed to do. I think that there's a mix of some of the like broader cultural elements and then kind of some of the work style elements. The broader culture, people increasingly know that they don't have to put up with that stuff. They can go somewhere where they're going to be treated fairly, where people care about them and they're taken care of. And then the work style, we're increasingly becoming a knowledge economy. Listen, if it's the 1870s and you're running a mill where people are making clothes and you just need someone to stand next to this loom and kind of push this stuff back and forth all day, there's maybe not a lot of knowledge work that's happening. You don't need a bunch of innovation. You don't need a bunch of collaboration among your employees. And in that, the people are kind of an extension of a machine, and culture may not be that important. Well, things are much more competitive now. We're all competing for talent. There's a tight job market, and you want the best people to come and stay at your job. And you need those people to collaborate and innovate and work on tough problems that are not as easy to figure out as, to spin this wrench 2 turns. So in that environment, we end up realizing that a strong culture is not just kind of a moral imperative of, hey, you shouldn't abuse people at work, but it's also a competitive advantage where, whether you want to look at metrics, like when you have a strong culture, you have lower employee turnover, better employee retention, better employee engagement, all of these things that signal that you're going to have lower cost on that headcount churn type of stuff. You can look in there, and then so that's, kind of making sure you're not wasting money on turnover. And you can also look into the positive benefits of coming out with better products. You're providing better customer service. Listen, you're not going to have a company that all your customers love if your employees who live with it all the time don't love it. And if you can get that right, then there are a lot of kind of knock benefits on some of the things that you can't so strictly define of, did you screw a cap on 3 bottles in the past minute? But, hey, what was that interaction like? Hey, who's identifying problems and fixing them instead of kind of kicking them over to the next division and it's someone else's problem? And it's all of those things that is really the next frontier of competition in our marketplace. And over the next 10 years, companies who get compliance right, companies who get employee engagement right, and ultimately who get culture right are going to be the ones who win out over everyone else who was just watching the pennies and they were missing the dollars that really show up in culture.
Yeah, and I think the pennies and the dollars are a big deal here. And when I think about what you're talking about, this transition, for some companies, they get it. Like they get it immediately, and they're investing heavily in culture, and they understand they want to be long-term, players, that their people are the valuable asset. But some companies still are maybe a little bit behind the curve. And I know, depending on the size of the company, things take time, so not picking on anybody. But why do you think some leaders are still so inclined to invest in other areas like training or other things, but they still are kind of, overlooking just that whole culture part of things is just so important?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Adam. I'm so glad you brought that up because, I think there are 2 ways that people get tripped up, and sometimes it's both of them. Sometimes it's just kind of an experience thing where, listen, if your parents grew up in the Dust Bowl and they were just thankful to have a job, you said, hey, you know what, like if I give someone a job and I give them a paycheck, that's what it should be. I'm paying you to do your job. You should just do that. And you don't really have a sense for how the world is different right now, right? People can see 1,000 jobs on Indeed. People can apply to 100 jobs tonight on Glassdoor, on Monster.com or whatever. Like people have a bunch of options and people are moving around a lot more than they were before. So it's a very different labor market. And if you're stuck in this old mindset of I gave you a paycheck, you owe me your work, and you better get it done because I'm the boss, That's just not how things are right now. So I think some people kind of have that mindset that maybe makes them think, hey, you know what, I don't need to invest in training. You do it on your own. Hey, I don't need to have a nice work environment like that you get paid to suffer through this. That might be why. And I think there's another side of it, which this one is probably more insidious and kind of creeps up on people. There's much less of a one-to-one relationship between a cultural investment and the return that it makes, right? So, you buy someone a new computer and their computer's, clocking out less and they're not wasting that 5 minutes that they've been waiting for things to load each hour. You can say, okay, here's kind of a clear ROI. I see day one, this starting to pay off. A cultural investment is a lot different because it touches everything, right? It's like, hey, how much of your success in life is due to your health? Well, what do you mean? My health doesn't drive my work output or, that word that I wrote for the book or whatever. Well, yeah, but if you're not healthy, how much less productive are you? And how much are you going to be kind of caught up in this other stuff or you're not going to live as long or whatever? It's much more like that. It's harder to draw a direct line between, hey, I took my team out for lunch and we talked about this strategic stuff and they all understand how they're linked into our strategy and how them contributing to our mission makes a difference in the world. Well, where does that pay off? Well, it pays off in 1,000 different ways that you're probably likely to kind of leave as a rounding error. But really it's those things that make a huge difference. And it's those things, I'm convinced, that have much more the power of compounding interest than anything else in the company. Like you buy that computer, that person's using it, they're just going to use it, and you have a clear sense of how it helps them, but it's probably not, the efficiency of that new computer probably isn't spilling over to 15 other people. Well, you build a strong culture, then all of those people impact a bunch of other people. They onboard new people better. They tell people, hey, that's not how we do it. We got to take care of that customer, whatever it is. You have this this powerful compounding effect that happens with the cultural investment. It's just not as clear and direct. So I think that people get tripped up on that one end of, hey, I don't need to do it because I pay someone, and on the other end of, hey, I've never seen that. No one's ever written me a check from the culture, so it's probably not a real thing. And, I'm here to tell you and anyone else who will listen, Adam, it's a huge thing. We see huge dividends in our business, and I'm sure everyone here has been somewhere where you've been in a company where it has toxic culture, where these people got away with this stuff or whatever, and that they left tons of money on the table because everyone was infighting and everyone was kind of wasting time, kind of trying to make sure they weren't getting stabbed in the back instead of actually going after the mission.
So, I'm going to ask you a question. I don't mean this to be a loaded question because there's no magic answer. There's no one answer. Every company is going to be different. Every organization is going to have different needs. They're going to be in their own, different place on their journey of building their culture. Some are going to be more further along. Some are not going to be. But that being said, I do try, if somebody's listening to this right now, obviously I want them to call you, and I'm going to give you a chance to leave ComplianceLine information to further the conversation because only so much we can get done on a short podcast episode. But
Sure.
If somebody's listening to this and they kind of know they're having a little bit of a self-reflection period right now. They're listening to this, they're driving in their car, wherever they're at in their office, they're having a little bit of a self-reflection period, and they're thinking, where do I start? Where do I start? I know we have some culture challenges or opportunities. Where do I start? What would be your answer to that question? Where does somebody start if they're just starting to think about culture and they're not quite as far along down the path?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'll kind of give you two different answers. One is to just start. So the way you start is you start, and I can walk through a couple different places, but you have to realize that this is an investment that you make. And you don't sit around, let's stick with the computer analogy. You don't sit around just expecting new computers to pop up because you wish it happened, right? You spend time looking into it, you learn about it, you do an RFP, blah, blah, blah. You put effort into it. So you got to start. And this is going to be something that it should show up on your calendar. It should show up in time that, maybe it's a few minutes each meeting, maybe it's maybe it's a session that you do with a team or whatever. But this thing of whether it's training your people, checking to make sure things are all right, kind of helping people understand as they're onboarded, what it's like here, you need to start. And, this is a journey of 1,000 steps, right? So just, get started on it and realize that hey, if I have not been investing in this, I have a culture right now that is not the culture that I want. Very few, if any, people just stumble into it and they say, wow, just all of these people that have been here over the past 20 years have done some things, and it's just such a great culture. It takes intentionality. It takes someone driving it forward. So you have to start taking steps to do that, whether it's learning about it, bringing someone in, and start doing things that are focused on building a stronger culture. So let's get a little tactical, kind of, I said that I'd circle back to it. I think one place to start is defining what your culture is right now. And that, that can be as simple as walking around or having a couple 10-minute meetings with people and be like, well, what do you think it's like to work here? How do people talk about it? You can look at your Glassdoor reviews, or, there are a bunch of different ways that you can do kind of a very rough assessment of what is it like for the person on the front lines living here? That's one way you can do it, kind of do an assessment. Another way that you can take a first step is thinking about and talking about how you want it to be, right? So those values that people put on the wall and those, the mission statement and stuff like that, do you have that? Does it matter to anyone? Is it actually relevant, or is it just kind of a dream that some consultant made up for you? So that's something else. And then you can do a lot, there's a lot that you can do that I just put in the category of caring well for people. Are people getting coached enough? Do people have a mentor or at least a manager who's looking out for them? Do people know what their career path is? Do people feel like when they have a tough day that either someone knows and helps them, or they at least have someone they can go to? So, any one of those things are going to start chipping away at this thing. Listen, there's no consultant you can bring in that 2 months from now, everyone's going to have a great experience at your company, but it's something that, listen, it's like a bonfire, right? And if you're warming 10 people or 100 people, the fire needs to be big enough to warm that many people. And you need to have a culture that is big enough and strong enough and has been invested in enough that a bunch of people can be warmed by that fire. And I think if you realize that that is really the core nucleus of your company, is that culture that you can't really put your finger on, but everyone has an experience of it. If you realize that shows up in really all of your activities, how your meetings are run, how people are promoted, how people talk about other people in the hallway, you can start impacting all of those things and really start, it's going to take a while, but you can start making some impacts that are going to bring you to a better place.
Man, I love your answer. And what I love about your answer the most is that obviously you gave some really actionable things that people can do today. You can do that today. Somebody can get up and they can pick up the phone and they can, ask one of their employees, hey, so they can ask these questions that you mentioned. I mean, these are very, very actionable things. But what I also like is that, for all the business people listening, culture isn't this abstract, intangible. There's a way to do it. Giovanni just said you have to put those minutes on your calendar. You have to put them on the minutes of what you're gonna to discuss in the meeting. And if you do these things, you're gonna move the initiative forward. So it's not some ethereal, magical, it's culture and this just happened by accident, like you said, in terms of nobody just had all these people 20 years later that just accidentally stumbled on a culture. It has to be done intentionally, and the way anything in business is done is going to be intentionally. And if you want a measurable outcome, is you have to plan for it. You have to write down those minutes and allocate time. You have to be intentional. I'm like, oh man, you unveiled the secrets to culture, Giovanni, and I could talk to you about this all day long. But we're about done for today's episode. But I do want to leave some information here. So if there's some business owners listening that want to continue the conversation with you and your team and to learn more about how ComplianceLine can help them further their journey on culture, what's the best way for them to connect?
Yeah, so a great place to start is ComplianceLine.com, ComplianceLine, one word.com. You can go there. We write on this a lot. We give a bunch of resources. There are ebooks and checklists and all of that stuff to get you started. And also, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. I'm Giovanni Gallo. You can find me on LinkedIn there. I'd love to connect with anyone who's trying to figure this out. Listen, even if you're not going to buy our service for 10 years until you're bigger, until finally your boss gets it right, I help a lot of people on LinkedIn. Just message me. We can chat. I can give you some tips or something like that. Listen, I do this. I care about this because I care about people. People spend most of their waking hours at work. And we really need to be living in a world where those workplace cultures are places where people can thrive, not where they suffer through and kind of live for the weekend. So I'd love to help someone make progress on this, and please reach out to me if I can help.
Fantastic. Well, Giovanni, really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing more about your background and all the great work that you're doing over at ComplianceLine. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. If you're a first-time listener, definitely hit that subscribe button. We definitely love to have you come back and listen to some more episodes, have some other great guests coming up for you. And if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, Mission Matters Business, hit the subscribe button there. But also leave us some comments in the video. Love to continue the dialogue in our YouTube community, always active there. And Giovanni, thanks again for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, for sure, man. Pleasure's all mine. I love what you're doing. Keep it up, Adam. And I'll look forward to catching some new episodes. I love what you guys do over at Mission Matters.